Hey, paisans, the time has come. On the air since 2009, the independently produced, non-FCC compliant champ of video game talk podcasting. Here comes Tiger Claw Radio. Here's your host, Critical Failure.
Yes, friends, it's time for Tiger Claw Radio. It's been a while, but we are back. Back on the air, back from getting the cannoli virus. And quite a show we have today. We got some news about Charles Martinet, the voice actor, longtime voice actor for Super Mario, for the Nintendo company. He's finally retiring as the voice of Mario. We got some stories about the old cannoli virus and recovering from the COVID-17. And Hemrock drops in to push us forward in his top 8 of the first 8 Final Fantasy games. All that and more. Let's kick things off with a chiptune from the 8-Bit Collective Archive. This is the top 40 of the 8,000 plus tracks in the 8-Bit Collective Archive that we've been counting down week after week. And we're at number 6. We are almost at the end. The 6th track is from Jakim, and it's from the album Bits and Pieces 2, and it's titled Every. You're listening to Tiger Claw Radio. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Martinet has retired as the voice of Mario. I posted this on the Discord, but let me read you the statement from Nintendo. Excuse me. And I quote, Charles Martinet has been the original voice of Mario in Nintendo games for a long time, as far back as Super Mario 64. Charles is now moving on to the brand new role of Mario Ambassador. With this transition, he'll be stepping back from recording character voices for our games, but he'll continue to travel the world, sharing the joy of Mario and interacting with you all. It's been an honor working with Charles to help bring Mario to life for so many years, and we want to thank and celebrate him. Please keep an eye out for a special video message from Shigeru Miyamoto and Charles himself, which we will post at a future date. Sad times, man. Can I get a moment of Terminal 64 for Charles Martinet? I can't think of a better way to truly celebrate the man. Join me, won't you, in a moment of Terminal 64. You know, for extra fun, I like to mix Terminal 64 with the audio of Country Roads. What that sounds like. I imagine that's what it feels like to have a stroke. At any rate, my hat is off to Charles Martinet. Thank you for all your years of Wahoo Pling Pling. Much appreciated. I can only brace myself for what the future holds. Well, let's talk about where I've been. A little while back, I had a vacation scheduled with my family for 2 weeks. We were going to go down to Disney World, which, by the way, a 2-week vacation in Disney World is a long vacation. It's a long time to be there. We went for 2 weeks once before, and we ended up leaving for home in the middle of the night, like a couple days before the end of it. But anyway, 2-week vacation, Disney World, middle of August. Down we go. And about a week, first of all, that also happens to be the hottest week on record in Florida. But there wasn't any rain, so I guess we did okay in that sense. About a week down, I got COVID, and then so we had to drive because we didn't fly. We drove. We drove all the way home from Florida to Maryland while I had not just while I had COVID, but while I was in the worst of COVID. Because if my experience was you get really bad sick for like 2 or 3 days, and then it just goes. So during that time, we were on the road, and I was just like shaking violently in the passenger seat while my wife drove. So it was a rough time. So we had this vacation thing, and then I had to recover from COVID, and now here I am. So once we got back home, this is where the story gets good. By that time, I was more or less feeling okay already, but I had to self-isolate in my office so that I could recover. That way I wouldn't, get anybody else sick. And as it turns out, it appeared to work. I was the only one who caught it. No one else is testing positive. Everything seems to be fine. So what did I do during that time? I did get to catch up a little bit on some video games. I played almost all the way through the original Resident Evil 4 on Steam. I got to the part where you get to the castle, and that's where the tone really changes. No more of the regular, I can't remember what they're called, but they're Spanish-speaking zombie equivalent. And in exchange, you get the weird mumbling guys in robes. That's the part where I just checked out. So I played that a bunch. I did a lot with pen and paper, like tabletop role-playing games, which I won't go into detail about, but I messed with that a lot, and I did some programming in Pico 8 for my RPG tool that I've been working on. And those were the big ones. Now, one thing that happened in the subsequent couple weeks was there was the release of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre video game. And I think I might have even talked about this briefly on the last show, but I can't quite remember. And whether or not you care about that movie franchise is irrelevant. Here's the reason why this caught my attention. This is made by the company Gun, the team that made the Friday the 13th game, and it's a very similar game. Friday the 13th was one killer, and 4 to 6 counselors that would just run around helplessly, and you'd kill them. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre game follows almost the same formula, but instead of one killer, it's now 3 killers. But essentially, the same game, just themed around Texas Chainsaw instead of Friday the 13th. So here's the reason why that got me excited. Because Friday the 13th, for its first year or two, was a really, really good game. And what happened was they got cleaned out in court for whatever reason. I can't remember why, but it came about where they couldn't make updates anymore. And once the updates stopped, the game just fell apart. People found bugs more than usual. It just got buggier and buggier as time went on. And the last time I played it, there were so few people playing. If you died, you could just leave the game and then join a new game, and the new game you joined would be the same game, and then you just come back to life again, thus breaking the game entirely. But anyway, the idea that they had a game following that formula was exciting, because the only game that follows that formula is really Dead by Daylight. It's the only game that has a decent player base, that has some success. Other games have tried, and none have really succeeded. So, another hide-and-seek game. All right, I'm interested. It's also worth noting that it's selling really well. It's at the top of the Steam sale charts. or it's not the most sold Steam game, but it was like 3 on that list for a while. So, it's a multiplayer driven game. That's really cool. And I can't help but remember that Friday the 13th was awesome and then it died. So I'm looking at this game surfacing and I know it's not a permanent thing, right? Like, Doom Eternal or whatever it is, the last Doom game. Whenever I get around to playing that, that'll always be there. Unless they remove it from Steam or something like this. This game, eventually the player base is going to die out. So I can't help but feel like if I'm going to take part, I can't really wait for it to get cheap. But on the other hand, they're also charging $40 for it, which in my opinion is pretty steep. For like a brand new game that people are saying isn't very fleshed out, not a lot of stages, that sort of thing. But I'm really interested. I thought really hard about it, and the only reason why I didn't jump is because I'm so close to replacing this entire computer, and it needs to be replaced, man. So, so that's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I was watching AEW wrestling, and a little while back, and they had Texas Chainsaw Massacre like for the game written all over the ring and stuff. So apparently they've been buying ad space in AEW programming. So that's a thing. Also, just want to make a quick announcement that my boy Dorabka has joined the Emerald Rangers podcast network, and his premiere episode is a whopping 3 hours. So head over to emeraldrangers.com, check out the podcast network, and listen to the Beastcast, because he's finally returned. All right, boys and girls. You like Final Fantasy? We've been going through this deep dive into the first 8 Final Fantasy games. The top 8 of the first 8. It's a project that Hemrock has been working on, and we are going to dig in to number 5 on the list. Here's Hemrock.
Number 5 out of 8, the top first 8 of the Final Fantasy series goes to Final Fantasy VIII. Yes, number 5 is actually Final Fantasy VIII. I beat the PS1 version. I went into this game thinking it was one of the black sheep of the Final Fantasy series, right down there with Final Fantasy II. And long story short, that was not the case. I have a newfound respect for this game and can better appreciate why someone may think it's one of the best in the series. Although I don't hold that view, hence it's ranked 5 out of 8, and I must say that it doesn't beat number 6, which is Final Fantasy I, by that much, so just barely number 5. Like Final Fantasy II, Square took risks with this game. Once again, they were innovating and switching things up, perhaps to see what would stick. There were things I liked and other things that just did not work as well as it should have. I really think if they had spent a little more time with the game mechanics, it could have been a much better title. In any case, let's go over some of the high points. First off, the graphics are a major step up from its predecessor, Final Fantasy VII. It went from blocky to realistic, and it was probably one of the best looking RPGs for the PS1, and especially for the time it came out. Quick side note, Final Fantasy VIII was released in North America on the same day as the Sega Dreamcast console. That was 9/9/1999. Also related to graphics are the cutscenes, and this game overall has the best cutscenes of the first 8 games, hands down. Now, that might not be saying much, as the cutscenes in the earlier games were primitive or non existent, excluding the PS1 remakes. And although graphics do not count for a lot in my book, I still tip my hat to their dedication to raising the standard. Related to graphics was also the setting of the game. I tend to like the more high fantasy approach to the earlier games, but the variety and amount of imagination and detail that went into the various cities and settings really blew me away, especially the city of Esthar. Speaking of aesthetics, probably one of my favorite looking airships in any Final Fantasy game is the Ragnarok, which you obtain towards the latter part of FF8. What a fantastic design. I also like how you eventually got control of Balam Garden and could use it as a vehicle to explore the world map and also double as a small city that you could simply explore, including its own training area with monsters. The story of FF8 is probably one of the most convoluted plot lines I've ever come across, and that's saying a lot because I played Final Fantasy VII. I'm not a big fan of the story as it relies too heavily on amnesia to explain things. And amnesia is every RPG story writer's get out of jail free card. Yeah, maybe you can play it once per game, but when you use it multiple times, you kind of get the sense that someone is cheating. Now enter Triple Triad. I have mixed feelings about this collectible mini card game. It was an excellent idea that was not deployed to its fullest. I like collecting the cards and building up my deck. I like being able to challenge random NPCs to the card game, and I love the way they integrated the cards into the battle mechanics. When you receive the ability to turn monsters that you are battling into cards, as well as being able to turn cards into various useful items based on your GF abilities. This was all amazing. The one thing that really dampened the whole experience was the rule system. Maybe it's a me problem, but I never fully understood why certain rules in Triple Triad changed based on where you were playing the game. And then sometimes the rules would change across a widespread area and perhaps across the whole game. It seemed arbitrary and sometimes superfluous. And what really shattered Triple Triad was the random rule. I hate the random rule. This is one of the rules that spread throughout multiple regions during the end of my playthrough and basically ruined this entire minigame. The random rule requires that the game picks random cards from any cards you possess and does not let the player choose their desired deck. This largely defeats the MTG esque deck building mechanic. I never figured out how to turn off the random rule. Eventually, I gave up on Triple Triad and carried on with the main story. What a shame, too, because I would have liked to spend more time with that minigame. Well, we can't talk about Final Fantasy VIII without discussing the junction system. Oh dear, Square. I know you were trying something new, but the junctioning system is clunky, unintuitive, and leads to even more grinding than would be expected in a typical Final Fantasy title. And speaking of grinding, not only do you have to worry about drawing magic, but you also have to be cognizant about leveling your GFs, or Guardian Forces, as well as your party members. And the leveling system for your party members is broken, since monsters scale to your level. So it actually behooves you to draw high level magic, but inevitably run from the battle, because the last thing you want to do is level up, particularly at the beginning of the game. Instead, you want to rely on upgrading your abilities from your GFs or Guardian Forces, which use a separate point system. Are you confused yet? To the uninitiated, the GFs are like summons, which you can use in battle, but they can also learn abilities that you can equip to your characters or use outside of battle, such as modifying low level magic into higher level magic or worthless items into somewhat more useful tools. It's an incredibly convoluted system that has a steep learning curve. But once you get over the learning curve, it's not too shabby. But I think I still prefer the simplicity of some of the earlier entries. When I played this game, I spent a large chunk of it playing along with a Let's Play. And yes, I did it in the most nerdy way possible by having the Let's Play open on one side of the screen and the game open on the other side. Although this certainly extended the amount of time I put into Final Fantasy VIII, it also made it more memorable. I played along with my favorite Let's Player who goes by the name of Necroscope86. Unfortunately, he no longer produces YouTube content and has had multiple sudden departures with deletion of his YouTube account on two different occasions, which led to some of his work being lost to the ether of the internet. However, some of his stuff has been reposted, and there is even a dedicated YouTube channel to reconstruct its content. Fortunately, he did not delete his secondary channel, which is where he used to dump some of his older content. In any case, it's the second channel that I found his FF8 Let's Play, which I followed. I loved the commentary and the feeling that you are experiencing the game with someone else who not only likes video games but considers Final Fantasy VIII to be the greatest of all Final Fantasies. Now, obviously, that's not my opinion, but his enthusiasm really endeared me to the title. FF8 is a fun, experimental entry into the Final Fantasy series. It has some of the greatest world design of any of the Final Fantasies that I've played. But its shortcomings and battle mechanics and the unnecessary nerfed card game known as Triple Triad really leaves a lot to be desired.
Final Fantasy VIII is a weird entry, and I think context of release has a great deal to do with the reason people remember it the way they do. Because before that, 7 was probably the most celebrated Final Fantasy game ever. And that's saying something, in a series that people love as much as they do Final Fantasy. But when Final Fantasy VII came out, that was, you talk about games that are system sellers, like, oh, I want to get that system just so I can play that game. Final Fantasy VII sold an entire generation of consoles. People wanted to move up to the PlayStation because of that game in a lot of cases. So you had Final Fantasy VII, and then on the other side of its release, you had Final Fantasy IX, which was, in my opinion, would top my list. I don't care if it wasn't one of the first 8 games. It'd still be the best of the first 8 games. Final Fantasy IX is my favorite of all the Final Fantasy games. So 8, looking back, it's between like the 2 biggest games of an enormous franchise. A franchise that stretches like almost an entire lifetime, So it already has that going against it, but I remember it fondly. I never played it all the way through, but what I played, I remember liking. It was one of those, like a lot of RPGs. My ADHD wasn't diagnosed yet, so I didn't have the attention span to sit through and play one. But I saw my brother play all the way through it, and I thought the gun swords were really cool when I was a kid. It introduced the Final Fantasy series to the card game that I think it perfected in Final Fantasy IX. But yeah, there's a lot of things to like about Final Fantasy VIII. And I have the original Steam release, not the HD version where they made some small changes, but the original HD release on Steam I have, and I will revisit it one of these days. So big thanks to Hemrock. And I'm looking forward to seeing what takes the number 4 spot on that list. Well, all right, we're about the 22.5-minute mark, so let's just take a quick minute to thank the sponsors. It's a Patreon-sponsored program. These guys help keep us on the air week after week after week. They are EmeraldRangers.com, Hemrock, Tecmo Balls, and Darabka. Thank you guys so much. And with that, let's move on to the fail bag. So I've been off for a few weeks, and the couple weeks prior to hiatus, I didn't read emails just because I ran out of time. So I know that the fail bag stretches back probably further than I can go. But let's go back like the last couple of episodes. Let's see. I can't remember if I read this or not, but let's see. This is a month ago now. Mecha Menace says, I totally forgot about Atari Homebrew Store on Atari Age. I believe they used to sell an NES Homebrew as well. It's a shame that they're getting rid of it. It's an entire store. Is it the entire store selection or only Atari? I checked out their offerings and was completely amazed at what the community did. The 4K Homebrew, Quad-Tari, as Atari Age calls it, took straight from the arcade. Wizard of War voice was more accurate sprites, mazes, and dashboard. The Zookeeper looks great too. Colors are popping in both. I mean, Atari games have only like 5 shades. These games have sprites with multiple colors. Top notch. I checked out their standard carts too. The arcade revision homebrews all look great. Pac-Man, Galaxian, Space Invaders, Defender all do a lot to improve on the originals. It's a shame that they're going away. They're going the way of the Dodo. If people want a legit cart, I guess most people just use a Harmony cart or whatever's the latest thing now. By the way, the non-4K Berserk homebrew adds samples of synthesized voice. Shocking. Yeah, man, it's pretty cool, some of the stuff they did. Although I will point out that if you look for Atari homebrew carts now, the vast majority of those carts are still available just like on developer websites or what have you. It is indeed a shame, but a lot of those carts are going to remain available. Undoubtedly, a handful are going to go extinct, and there's just not really a way around it. But it's not quite as bad as I had initially thought. So there's that. But if there was ever a reason to get back into Atari, I would say it's now. Here's another comment that says, I thought someone would have figured out how to turn Carmageddon into Twisted Metal by now. Ever play Mega Race? Before Carmageddon was a thing, that was the only game I ever wanted to play at Egghead when we visited. I was totally envious of those CD-capable machines. Haha, that's a long time ago. Though I have expressed this before in your comments, I need the option to play PC speaker sound in my emulation. Are we good? My recording skipped out on me for a second. Where was I? He was talking about PC speaker sound. I don't want to stop the recording because I'm afraid I'll have a hard time getting it going again. CD-capable machine. Yeah, here we go. That's the sound I knew in old DOS games. Playing Roland or whatever synthy tracks or even sound samples seems uncanny, even when paired with the majesty of Sierra's point and clicks, to my ears, that is. Yeah, I would agree, man. When I was playing all those games, it was PC speaker sound. That's the way I experienced Doom for the first time. So I was on PC speaker a lot longer than most people say when they look back at the DOS era. It was one of those things where I knew other people had actual sound, and I was like, All right, last one from Mecca. He says, 20 minutes in, and this is from a month ago. I'm inclined to agree that that it's easy to tell whether you like a game or song within the first 10 seconds. Then there's a track like Bazooey's Wizards and Warriors, Wise Wizards, Old Warriors, posted on OC Remix originally way back in 2003, which has a refrain that kicks the song in a new direction about a third of the way through. Another segment, which might make you hesitate dropping out so quickly, is the cacophony that builds in Sephiroth's Echo, the Tides of a Derelict Machine, which takes a bit longer than 10 seconds. This mind-melting tone shift is something that happens in the mainstream pop music, in the refrain of Cheap Trick's 1982, If You Want My Love, which shunts the happy, sappy main segments into a desperate call for help. My habit of scrolling through tons of songs like a robot is listen for a bit, then skip forward. Something interesting might happen, and you'll wonder, how did it get here? Yeah, I've done that. If you do end up checking out Bazooey's Wizards and Warriors, I recommend sticking with the old 2003 remix. The guy came back years later to revise it, and in my opinion, took some of the edge away. Yeah, I know there's a whole on that site. I know there's a ton of like really amazing video game remix work, and I've never really tapped into it. I'm not sure why, but for whatever reason, original chiptunes is what I always favored. Not sure why. And then as a consequence, in sites like 8-Bit Collective, you don't see it as much anymore, but I would find tracks I thought were original, but they turned out to be remixes, and I didn't find out until later. Yeah. And then we had... That was from episode 475, the last one where we talked about Final Fantasy. Let's see, I know we have a couple on Death Adder's show. Yeah, Death Adder writes, well, I guess the reviews for this episode speak for itself. Oh, and you asked about Tomb Raider. I'm playing it on GOG using an Xbox controller, and I'm on the level Obelisk of Camoon. All right. So the thing about the original Tomb Raider is I don't know all of the levels by name. I know the Citadel because it was the one I got stuck on for years. So let's look at the Obelisk of Camoon. I'm bringing it up right now. It looks like the one where you're just trying to go, where like level 10? This might be past the Citadel. Yeah, where you're just trying to go up and up and up. And at the top is like the big crazy boss battle for that weird turkey thing. Yeah, this is really far into the game, man. Kudos. Kudos indeed. And then he also says, a true masterpiece, Death Adder. Never in my, like reading off quotes that he wrote himself. Never in my life have I been such an emotional roller coaster as in episode 459 of Tiger Claw Radio. And it goes on. Oh, and the very last one, he says, I took my entire family to this podcast twice. Terry Funk, which is sad because he wrote this 3 weeks ago, and since then, Terry Funk has actually passed away. Hats off to all my wrestling fans out there who know who Terry Funk was. And I think that's it. There wasn't a whole lot of movement in terms of TCR comments since then. A lot of comments on random dribbles and drabbles that I put out on the YouTube channel. But for the most part, by and large, I believe that wraps it up. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know what that sound is. Time to hang it up for another week of Tiger Claw Radio. Thanks so much for clicking in and listening to us talk about games and hanging out and listening to chiptunes and all the stuff we do. Whatever it is you have going on this week, I hope it goes well for you. Enjoy the last of the summer, and I'll see you next week.